Hello, welcome to the first episode of the Goodwill Cxunting podcast. I used to have a podcast, 2020, 2021. It was called That Irish Feminist Podcast, and it's kind of funny because I haven't recorded anything podcasty since then, but it's coming back to me. The setup's coming back to me, the software's coming back to me, the editing and stuff. I need to remember how to layer sound, but I'm going to give it a go. I don't want to risk losing months of work again, which I did, unfortunately, when my TikTok got banned. So I thought, let me do a podcast format, and hopefully that way I can, keep my work alive for longer. It's quite nice doing this as well, because the last time I recorded an episode for the one I had before, the Irish Feminist Podcast, was in 2021, probably around this time as well, 4 years ago. So it's kind of beautiful to see my own life journey since then. Whenever I last recorded it, I was living in a tiny studio flat in North London, and now I'm in my own flat with a big window. I didn't have a window I did have a window, but it was a tiny window. And it's just funny, isn't it, where life takes you? Anyways, I have a creaky chair and creaky headphones, so hopefully it's not going to be too crazy. But I'm going to talk about something that I made a video about yesterday. Today is the 4th of July, and I made a video yesterday talking about how women's bodies were essentially a site of external ownership by the Irish state until my generation. So I'm 32, so until millennial women, really, women's bodies have been owned by the state in Ireland. And I've had a lot of comments from people who have really opened up and told stories about their families, talking about how their grannies had 14, 15, 18, 19. There was actually a couple who had 21 children. And this is not, great grannies, great grannies. This is grannies. Live in memory. There's people who are commenting who were one of 15 children, and it's something that I've always been interested in. I was doing a PhD. It's been paused because I'm trying to focus on my novel, but my PhD was looking at transgenerational trauma in Ireland and how transgenerational trauma is maintained and perpetuated by the state. Well, I actually say state actors, but state actors just means different bodies within the state. So that can be the government, it can be the police force, it can be the criminal justice system, it can be the healthcare system. Obviously, in the case of Ireland, it has for a long time been the church as well. But this is something that I am really, really interested in. So it feels like the right time to start a podcast, because this is something that I can actually speak on with a relative level of knowledge about it. I'm going to start by very briefly talking about kind of the legacy of the state and the state's involvement with women's bodies in Ireland. So obviously we know in Ireland there was the mother and baby homes, there was the Magdalen laundries. We know that, obviously repeal the 8th didn't happen, repealing the 8th Amendment, which meant that women could have access to free, safe and legal abortion, didn't happen until 2018. And obviously it isn't even the case now that everyone can get free, safe and legal access to abortion in the Republic of Ireland. But, even things like the contraceptive pill not being able to purchase until 1985, wasn't made legal until 1979. Ireland has always been in charge of women's bodies. And when I say Ireland, I mean the state, right? So women have never, until my generation, had the freedom or the liberation of being themselves within their own bodies. And it's kind of hard to conceive of, but something I've been thinking about when I was getting all these comments, and there's at least 50 comments from people whose family members had well over 10 children. And something I've been thinking about is it's like an image, right, of a woman realizing that her period's not came, and she already has 10 children, and she's in the bathroom and she's on her own, and her children are outside the door screaming and shouting. Her husband's at work, and she's realizing that she's about to have to take another pregnancy on, and she's crying to herself and praying that this one doesn't go full term. And that's like an image that came to my mind, or a scenario that came to my mind, and that's kind of how I start writing novels and stuff as well. It's like almost like a scene appears to me, but that scene appeared to me, and I just thought, I wonder how many of the women that these comments are about were in a situation like that, where they were finding out that they were pregnant again and just wishing, praying, hoping that this pregnancy wouldn't go through. And, whenever you have 3 children now, if you're on your 3rd child, the midwife or the doctor, whoever it is that you're dealing with, will make you aware that, you're at heightened risk of different issues because of what your body's been through already. Your pelvis, for example, can be a much greater risk because of, the amount of stress and the amount of weight that you've already put on it with 2 pregnancies. And so the fact that is happening now at a 3rd child, and yet there was women in Ireland in living memory, still alive, who have had upwards of 10 children, is just shocking. It's really, really, really hard to get your head around. And I'm 32. I don't know if I'll have a child myself. I do want to be a parent at some point, but I'm not particularly set on how that comes. I have friends who've had children, gorgeous little babies, but my friends are very transparent with me about the difficulties of what they've been through, and I really appreciate their honesty, because it's not something that women have been able to speak about honestly for a very long time, and really until our generation. And I have a very personal connection to the erasure of women's histories in Ireland, as we all do, most of us do. But what really motivated me on this journey, and that when I say journey, I mean studying this stuff, wanting to do a PhD on this sort of stuff, was on both sides of my family, women are missing. And I actually wrote a poem about it called Where Are the Women, which I might share at some point, I don't know. But women are missing. So my mum's mum, my maternal grandmother, I never met her. She died when I was like 26, 27, but I never met her. And there was various reasons for that. But she had children, my mum, obviously, my uncle, and she had another baby boy who died of cot death. And I still don't know the full ins and outs of the situation, but I do know that she likely suffered postpartum depression. Obviously, her child died, which is incredibly traumatic. And she was also a Catholic that married a Protestant, which we don't need to get into, but there was a lot of issues surrounding that in her time. On my dad's side of the family, my granda, who I get my surname from, was born in a mother and baby home, which means that even my surname, we always talk about how women's surnames, they're not their own surname, and our surnames get erased, and we just have the name of the men that we were brought up by. But I don't even have his name. I have a name that the state gave him. So my actual identity, my actual surname, really kind of belongs to the Irish state in that sense. So my granda was born in a mother and baby home. He was adopted by my great granny, and the story is that when he was adopted, they brought him into the chapel and said, "Can anyone take this child home?" And she said, "Okay." And that is how they were giving children away in the state. They were just giving children away like it meant nothing. Some statistics on this. So 56,000 unmarried mothers went through the mother and baby homes. This is not the Magdalen Laundries, by the way. This is just the mother and baby homes. An estimated 56,000 unmarried mothers went through them. And bear in mind, a lot of these mother and baby homes have lost the information. The one that my granda was born in was there was a fire, and all of the information and records were destroyed. So what we know of, there's 56,000 unmarried mothers went through them, 57,000 children, and there's an estimated 9,000 child deaths in these mother and baby homes between 1922 and 1998. There was a 15% death rate for babies born in mother and baby homes. 15% of the babies that were born in mother and baby homes died. That's double the national average. And obviously we know, things like, I can never say it, so my apologies, Tuam, Tuam, that place, is it County Clare? Can't remember where it is. Somewhere down sort of the southwest of Ireland. There was nearly 800 bodies found when they were excavating to build something. And I remember hearing that at the time and feeling physically sick, because the state was treating human life like something to be cast aside and disposed of without record. So when we look at the history of the state ownership of women's bodies, and obviously this is just the mother and baby homes I'm talking about. I'm not even talking about the Magdalens yet. I'm not even talking about, access to abortion. I'm not even talking about access to contraception. I'm just talking about the mother and baby homes as a sort of most common example. When we look at the state ownership of women's bodies and the way that women were put through these mother and baby homes and the normalisation of these mother and baby homes as well, it's impossible to deny that women had no choice and no say in the ownership of their bodies, in the ownership of their reproductive system, in the autonomy of their own lives. It's also important to recognise that these women have had no justice or reckoning. These children have had no justice or reckoning. The state, and this is the Irish Republic, that is, sealed the Magdalene laundry files. And like I said, when I speak about the state, I mean the state of government, right? The state being an entity that controls what happens within the country. So the state sealed reports, files, archives, records into the mother and baby homes and the Magdalene laundries as well. And it sealed them for 30 years, which means that they are waiting for people to die. They're waiting for people to die, women and children who have been through these homes to die before they release them, so that people cannot get compensation that are deserved it. And it's not even like it's about money, right? I mean, I'm sure money would help, but this is not really about money for a lot of these people. It's about justice for what they've been through. And the state has sealed these files for 30 years solely to protect the state from scrutiny of what these women went through. And like I said, those stats that I gave just there were just about the mother and baby homes. I haven't even went into the Magdalene laundries. So the Magdalene laundries, it's worth noting that the last Magdalene laundry closed in 1996. 1996 is when the last Magdalene laundry closed. And I actually have a friend who her mum was a mental health nurse. My dad's a mental health nurse as well, but my dad was a mental health nurse in the north of Ireland. My friend's mum was a mental health nurse in the Republic, and she told me that her mum doesn't come from Ireland, but she lived in Ireland for a number of years. And a lot of the women that she dealt with were people who had been in the Magdalene laundries, they'd been institutionalised for most of their lives. And when they closed the Magdalene laundries, they just shoved a lot of the women from there into asylums, mental hospitals, whatever, because the women had been institutionalised for so long in the Magdalene laundries that they weren't able to be released, simply because the state had put them into the position of being disabled, mentally ill. So they went into the Magdalene laundries as women, pregnant women who were there, because of the state, because their family or whoever had put them there. And they ended up being mentally unwell as a result of the treatment that they had had in the Magdalene laundries. And when the last ones closed, they were just put into state mental institutions because they couldn't function as normal members of society. And she said it was really sad, and a lot of them were very infantilized. So they would just want my friend's mum, who was the nurse, to like braid their hair or play with toys and things like that. And it actually makes me feel, I can feel like a coolness on my body right now when I say that, because it's hard to comprehend, isn't it? Yeah, very sad and horrific. So the Magdalene laundries, like I say, the last one closed in 1996, and there's a recorded 14,000 admissions, 10,000 women recorded as going through them. There was some repeated entries, so there was some women who were put in and out on multiple occasions. I also want to highlight again that this is recorded. A lot of what happened in these places was not recorded, right? But 10,000 women went through the Magdalene laundries in an island in which our population is minuscule compared to the rest of the European countries. 10,000 women went through these institutions. Magdalenes were different to the mother and baby homes. The mother and baby homes, you went in for having a baby. The Magdalenes were for all types of women, not just pregnant women. Pregnant women did go into them, but you could be sent to the Magdalenes for all sorts of different reasons. And there's a brilliant film called The Magdalene Sisters, which I recommend watching. It's not an easy watch, but it's great to give insight into this system. The only criticism that film had was from survivors of the Magdalene laundries, who said that the film didn't depict the abuse enough. And when you watch the film, let me tell you, it's a hard watch. So you could be sent to the Magdalenes for tons of different reasons. You could be sent to the Magdalenes for being a, quote, fallen woman or a moral failure. So that is pregnancy outside of wedlock. It's women who were suspected of sexual activity. It's girls and women who were considered promiscuous. Bear in mind, promiscuous, to what we know, to what it was back then, is totally different. So this could literally be you were gorgeous and people thought that you were possessed by a demonic spirit because men leered after you. You could be sent in because you were too poor. Your family was too poor to look after you. You could be in them because you were an orphan. You could be sent into them because you were in the mother and baby homes and there was no one to take you back. You know, once you'd went through it, once you'd had the child, they didn't want you to come back to the family. So you could be referred from the mother and baby home. You could also be sent in because you were, quote, disobedient. So this could be, you know, you were, they would have called it unruly, or you spoke back to your family, or you were considered a problem in the household. And the film actually does a great job of depicting this. There's one character in the film, and I don't think this is a spoiler, there's one character in the film who is raped by her uncle, and she tells, or her cousin, she's raped by a family member, and she tells her family, and the family send her to the Magdalene laundries as a result, you know. So it cannot be downplayed, the plethora of reasons as to which women would end up in these institutions, and the amount of women that went through them. So worth noting that when it says there was 14,000 that went through them, but 10,000 women recorded, often re-entered them. And that could be for a plethora of reasons again. They could be so traumatized by what had happened to them in the Magdalenes that when they came out, they weren't able to reintegrate into their families, into their society. They could have came out, you know, especially in the case of the film, you know, if someone was being raped by a family member and had a child, they would come out and experience that abuse again, possibly get pregnant again, have to go back in. So there's so many reasons that women would go in and out of these institutions, or go into these institutions and be there for life. And again, remember, the state was not recording the information properly. So what we know from what has been recorded is that at least 900 women died in the laundries. There have been 150 unmarked graves discovered in various different places around Ireland. And remember, this is the Magdalene laundries, which is separate from the mother and baby homes. To at least 30% of the admissions were state referrals. So this is like through the courts, through doctors, through the police. So the state was actually sending about just over a quarter of women into these institutions. The state was recruiting them. And this is pretty horrific. But the youngest recorded girl to be sent to the Magdalenes was 9, and the oldest woman to be sent to them was 89. 40% of women who went through them stayed over a year, 15% stayed over 5 years, and 8% were a decade or for the rest of their lives. So the state has had ownership of women's bodies in Ireland, and bear in mind, I'm talking about formal ownership, right? Formal state ownership. Has had ownership of women's bodies in Ireland for over 100 years. It's only in my generation now. I was born in 1993. The last one closed in 1996. It's only in my generation now that these aren't an immediate threat to women. These were an immediate threat to women, these institutions. Never mind the men that these women were growing up around. The state itself was a threat. There's been various reports done. Like I say, they've locked away a lot of the files. There's been various reports, there's been various apologies and things like that. But, you know, nobody really knows about these outside of Ireland. A lot of people in Ireland don't even know about it or don't want to acknowledge it. But a lot of people outside of Ireland have no idea that these happened. And that is a massive disrespect to the women that have survived these institutions. And I don't know if anybody's seen The Handmaid's Tale. So I watched a couple of the seasons of it. I read the book and then watched the seasons until the book ended, and then I gave up on it. But something that really irked me about the discourse around The Handmaid's Tale and the kind of imagery of women wearing those red capes and everything to the protests was Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale. She has stated that everything that happened in that book had happened in real life, and one of her main sources of the concepts of that book and, you know, the way that the women are treated was the Magdalene laundries, and she's on record saying that. So Handmaid's Tale is, yes, a fictionalization of the abuse of women, but everything that happened in it really happened, and mostly to women in Ireland. Yeah, this is obviously quite a depressing first episode, but look, go hard or go home, you know. This is a reality for women in Ireland. It's a reality for my granny, who is the most important person in my life. Actually, I only have 2 tattoos, and it's proper. I actually saw a video the other day, and it was like when Smix turned 16, and it was like a guy, oh god, he's so funny, hold on, what's he called? Let me find him. Yes, Kieran McKenna. It's Ciaron McKenna on TikTok. He is so funny. But he has this video. He does like wee kind of skits about people from the north. But he has this video and it's like Smicks when they turn 16, and it's like, I'm gonna get a tattoo for my nanny. But yeah, I got a tattoo for my nanny is the point. I got her maiden name tattooed on me. My nanny grew up right in Andytown. Now it seems like her dad was relatively liberal. Obviously I can't really tell, but she speaks very highly of him. And you know, he, for example, when her period was really bad, he would come and collect her from the shirt factory, which I guess in those days was pretty big deal. But she speaks about, you know, these systems, growing up around these systems, and the systems that I'm talking about, the Magdalene laundries, the mother and baby homes, they were like not just something that were on the periphery, they were like an everyday threat to her growing up. And you know, I was partially raised by her. Like I went to hers every day after school, and she's kind of the person who's had like probably the biggest impact on my life in terms of who I am as a person. She's only 50 years older than me, and her life was entirely defined by the state. So yeah, like I say, bit of a heavy first episode. I think I'll do an episode next on class or something like that, maybe. I don't know, we'll see. But something a bit more broad in scope. But yeah, if you've listened to this, thank you for listening. And if you have any feedback or anything, feel free to drop me an email or a DM. My email is goodwillcxunting@gmail.com. Obviously, if you can, please like this on whatever medium I share it on. Please follow on TikTok, all of those different things. I have written a novel, which I've mentioned a lot. But I've written a novel, and my novel is about all of this kind of shit, right? There's a granny in it who, you know, talks about this sort of stuff, but in the way that grannies speak, you know, really about women's lives, the journeys of different women's lives in Ireland. And that's really my main motivation for all of the different things that I'm putting out, is to try and get that published. Try and do this every Friday, I think, and see how that goes for a while. And yes, thank you for listening to the Goodwill Cxunting podcast. Have a gorgeous week. Stay safe. Bye.